I'm Greg Kettinger.
And what did you do here at the band?
I'm a guitarist.
You play with John frequently.
Yes.
Tell me what it's like to hear his music, his arrangements, reimaginations of his Oliver Nelson here. How did it make you feel?
You know, the caliber of musicians involved in the project makes that much more special.
Tell me what made this so special to you as a player.
Well, John always writes in such a way where the things that he needs from me are as specific as possible, sometimes down to, reading a specific notation of a chord or even a voicing. And much of the time, it's sort of a guide or a framework. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you put that into like emotional terms, how would you describe that to somebody? Like, I played with John and it makes me feel like...
There's definitely a sense of freedom of input on my end. Being a rhythm section player for starters and being a chordal instrument. So what's great for me about playing with John in general, not just this project, but in all of the projects we've done together, he tends to give me a bunch of freedom within a given framework.
And how did you like playing with the rhythm section here?
Oh, tremendous. I told Mike Richmond, and I've known Jim Riddle for some time through Pat Martino, but I told both Mike and Danny when we first met. I had never met either of them before, and over the 4 days that we spent together, I found out that they're not only are they top-notch musicians, they're just really, really sweet people.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you think that how did that early time, the Monday, and how did that affect your connectivity musically?
Oh, I think getting to play together, even just, I think it was about 2 hours or maybe 2.5 hours on Monday, it just set us up, mentally to sort of know, or maybe not so much know, but have the ability to predict what the other players may do, reactionary kind of thing.
What would you tell someone who never heard about John? What would you tell them about him?
As a musician, as a composer, as an arranger?
If someone came up to you and said, I hear you work with John Vanore, who's that?
Okay. Okay. My history with John, I first found out who he was back in, I guess, the late 80s when he first released the Abstract Truth records then. I was in my 20s, I guess. I think I had just gotten out of Temple University. And I saw that band a couple times, different festivals, different places around the city. So,
what did you think of the music when you heard it back then?
Oh, I thought it was great. Really, really unique. No one else was doing that kind of thing, especially in Philly. You had to come up here to find music of that caliber and leaning in that direction with that much sort of freedom and creativity.
So now that you're here, and now that you just did all this,
yeah,
and you're one of the cats, so what would you say to John about that?
Well, it's funny, that's exactly what we were just talking about in the hallway, but this is one of the best best assemblages of musicians I've ever had the pleasure to play with.
And it's interesting to note how much John thinks of you.
Oh, well,
'Cause
that's that's flattering to hear.
so so from your chair, is there anything that hit you over the couple days that is just like so special that you would want to tell somebody about it?
Well, again, caliber of musicianship, the confidence of each player, guys who are pretty much the best at what they do, or among the best at what they do, and not afraid to, raise a hand and say, let's roll back to measure 36, or, whatever needs to get done. This is another thing that he and I were just talking about right before I came in. The common goal, I think, is the thing that struck me the most. So in a room of whatever this was, 13, 14 musicians, all of whom almost have the right to be egotistical, none were. It was kind of all about just getting the project done to the best that we could.
Is there anything that you would say about that you could say about John's writing that somebody who didn't know him would want to hear?
I tell my students all the time to check him out for exactly that reason. He's unique in a bunch of different ways. He's modern, but obviously comes from a traditional background, has the composing and arranging technical skills to be able to execute what he hears in his head, but he's also never afraid to experiment. I mean, you probably know as well as I do, he's been changing parts, changing pieces of tunes. We changed something this morning before we recorded it. So that's another thing that I always loved about his writing. It's almost like it's never really finished. It's kind of in a constant state of growth.
That's awesome. And I guess the final bit is, what do you think Oliver Nelson would say about these 2 days?
I would think he would be pleased.
Who would be pleased?
Oh, I'm sorry. I would think Oliver Nelson would be pleased to hear the work, to hear his work, to hear John's recreation of his work, and to hear, that there's still people who want to play his music, that there's still someone at least out there who loves it enough to want to address it, and not just address it in an historical way where, we're going to go buy 15 Oliver Nelson big band charts and put on a show, but actually John's word that he uses is reimagine, the music. And he knows John knows Nelson's music so well that I think he's probably the only one capable of pulling this off the way it went.
Perfect. Excellent. You're the man.